excited to have on the Ask Box episode 5 today my friend Molly from back in the day on Tumblr, and we're going to be talking about Inception.
We are, allegedly.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am in Baltimore, Maryland, East Coast. What up? I'm currently studying media production, about to get my certificate and go into video editing. So I am basically exactly the kind of person, I guess, that you would expect to find like on a podcast talking about the early days of Tumblr, I suppose, because media is basically what I do.
Absolutely. So when did you first join Tumblr and why?
So I know you and I think Sam talked about this in episode 1 about the Exodus from LiveJournal. I was part
Uh-huh.
of that as well. Um, Basically, that was where I used to kind of spend my time online, as it were, and then it started, slowing down when all the content creators and everyone was jumping ship, which I still don't know exactly what the reason for that was, or like what it was that prompted that kind of exodus, but
Uh-huh.
apparently it was the thing to do at the time, so I kind of went over and wasn't really sure what I was doing on Tumblr at first. This was in spring of 2010 or summer of 2010, something like that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I was just actually, yeah, so I think I was just kind of like just lurking in tags and like reblogging pictures of like hot celebrities that I was into at the time, but not really like using it uh kind of as a way to like meet people in fandom, or like wasn't really sure how to go about doing that.
Right.
Um, it didn't seem very like self-explanatory at first. It was
Yeah,
kind
for
of one of those
sure.
things where you just, yeah, ended up on it and kind of just were clicking on things, not really sure what you were doing, but like, oh, there's pretty pictures and people are
Uh-huh.
making pretty graphics and stuff.
I
So
mean, yeah, it's kind of hypnotic. I mean, it doesn't really matter what you're interested in. I think when you first join Tumblr, even if you're not part of a fandom or whatever, you just sort of get sucked in, the endless material just being in your face like that.
yeah, it really was endless. I was especially like when you compare it to today, like how slow my dash is these
Uh-huh. Oh,
days.
yeah.
And yeah, and like listening to this podcast, I was like, wow, like it really did used to be just like content all the time, like every time you refreshed. Like
Absolutely.
what's up with that?
I mean, it feels like Tumblr now is probably what LiveJournal was like when you joined Tumblr, you know?
Yeah, right. When
Although
after
we
everyone, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so I did that for I don't know, maybe like a few months. I wasn't really like using it consistently when
Uh-huh.
I first joined, 'cause I didn't like there wasn't really any appeal in it for me yet to be on it that
Yeah.
constantly.
What
Um
was your first username?
oh god, I don't remember honestly. It was I know it had something to do with like this lost crack video that I was like obsessed. You remember like back in the old days on YouTube? I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe this was like before your time, but like when people would like dub over episodes of stuff with like their own, comedic dialogue or whatever.
Oh, I
And
think
like
that was
most
a
of the time it
little
wasn't even
yeah.
what's up?
That was, like, a little
Most
before
of the
my
time
time.
yeah, and like it wasn't even funny, but like we were like 15 and thought it was funny. So yeah, it was like probably one of those. I
Mhm.
honestly can't remember it. I probably changed my URL like a lot in the early days as well.
That was
I
the
feel like
beautiful
that was a
thing.
thing that was a lot more common
Yeah,
than
because
as opposed to like now when it's like a brand that you have now that you have to maintain,
I
you
think
know?
that's very true. I think back then also, like, not everything was taken, so you could just change it, and if you thought of something, it was probably available as compared to today
Right,
when it's
yeah.
like, well, yeah, number that's a really great point. You don't wanna change your username because it's your brand and it's how people identify you, but also, if you wanted to change it, like, everything is taken.
Exactly.
Um, so you joined in spring 2010. That's around when I joined as well. Do you remember
Mhm.
when that year did Inception the movie come out?
Inception came out in the summer. It's like
Uh-huh.
end of July.
Uh-huh.
And then I didn't really like get involved in the fandom until like I was back at school and actually had like more free time, weirdly enough, because I was like working a full-time job that summer and didn't really have like a lot of time to be online.
Mhm.
And then like I went back to school and it was also a time in my life when like I didn't really know what I was doing in school and like was not motivated to like go to my classes and pay attention.
Uh-huh.
So I ended up like spending a lot more of my time online probably than I should have, but it all worked out.
Right. So, but over the summer, when you did go online, did you notice the fandom like starting to pop up? Did it like intrigue you
No,
at all?
I don't exactly remember like how I got drawn into it at first, but like it definitely wasn't soon after watching the film. I didn't understand Inception the first time I watched it. I was one of those people who like went and saw it in the theater and was like, I don't know what is happening, and then had to. I think I ended up seeing it like maybe 2 or 3 times in theaters, and like by the third time, I was like, okay, like this is, the best movie ever made, and like if you don't
Uh-huh.
understand it, you're just dumb.
Yeah. So for
But
listeners that somehow escaped this movie when it was out, or maybe were even too young for it, what is Inception about, if you can?
oh god, so Inception uh is this it's I don't know like what exactly genre you would classify. Like it's kind of sci-fi,
It's like a
like
thriller, kind of
yeah,
like a
there's like
spy movie,
there's thriller elements to it
or it's
with
like a
like so the main character is Leonardo DiCaprio.
Mhm.
Plays this guy called Cobb, and it's based around this technology of dream sharing, which is like basically there's like this machine they invented, and you can hook multiple people up to it, and then like one person in the group is the dreamer, and you basically it sedates you and you all go under and you're in this person's dream, and they're figuring out ways to kind of use this technology for all different sorts of things like espionage and stealing corporate secrets and
yeah,
things like that.
it's essentially a heist movie.
Yeah, it is a heist movie.
'Cause
Yeah,
they
thank
like
you
they
for
get the
saying that.
team together.
Yeah. Yeah, and everyone has their role, and you've
Right.
got the forger and the architect and the point man, and
Uh-huh.
and so yeah, it really is kind of like a buddy heist movie in that
Mhm.
way almost. But there are some like thriller aspects to it too, with he's being haunted by his dead wife, who he keeps seeing her in the dreams and
Uh-huh.
all that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, if for anyone listening who doesn't know what Inception is, now you know.
And it's fairly cerebral, but at the same time, you can just sit back and watch and sort of take what you want from it. So it was a very popular movie that year.
Hmm.
But then there was this sort of huge thing on Tumblr that, revolved around aspects of the movie that maybe were not the marketed ones.
Yeah, like the shipping.
Well, yeah,
I
yeah, and the character relationships, which essentially is what any fandom is
yeah,
about.
yeah, right, right. It's like when will content creators learn? Like we don't care about action. We just want the characters to talk to each other.
Well, that's an
But
interesting point. I was tweeting about this last night, maybe you saw it, but I was sort of like, the platonic ideal of a fan work is very different than the platonic ideal of a work, in that a work as it exists,
mhm.
it gives you things to build off of in the fan work. So you wouldn't want to watch a movie that's just like, I mean, maybe you would, but it wouldn't be a blockbuster if the characters were just sort of like staring at each other and talking about their feelings and then like touching each other and then like pulling away and then talking some more. No, that's what the fan work is for. That, takes those relationships that exist in like a thriller or a heist movie or a sci-fi movie or whatever, and it brings them into a different context for a different kind of enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not see you tweeting about this,
Oh, wow,
but I'm
coincidence,
I'm
yeah.
glad I brought it up.
Yeah, I was 'cause I was thinking
Coincidentally
about it.
there.
So going back to Inception, I mean, I know, but tell me, what was the main ship?
So Arthur Eames was the big ship of the Inception fandom, which I actually did not ship. Upon get I Arthur and Cobb was the pairing that I
Oh.
kind of first noticed
Mhm.
when I watched the movie.
And this
And
is
even like
this is Eames played by Tom
it
Hardy
was
and
played
Arthur.
by Edward Thomas Hardy, yes, of MySpace fame.
And then
uh,
Arthur was,
Arthur
Joseph.
played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah,
Yes,
MySpace.
who I also became obsessed with, and like it was one of those things where I saw him in Inception, and then like went and watched his whole filmography, or maybe
Right,
not his whole filmography, but like a lot of it,
right.
um, because that was kind of how I consumed content at the time, was like by latching onto a certain actor.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
What was
but
at
yeah,
the
so. Mhm.
What was at the center of the Arthur Eames relationship that people really grabbed onto?
I I think it was just the amount of like backstory that obviously existed between these two characters, but is only ever really like hinted at in the movie.
Mhm.
Because the first time Eames is mentioned in the movie, we haven't like met him on screen yet. Cobb says something about like, oh, I'm gonna go, find Eames and get him on the team, and Arthur like right away is like, oh, Eames, he's in Mombasa. Like, what do you need him for? So it's like, first of all, like, why do you immediately know where he is when like you
Uh-huh.
guys apparently haven't like seen him in years? And then it's like, why like to just like have the knee jerk reaction to Eames' name coming up that he did, I guess. And then the same thing happens when Cobb finds Eames and he's like, oh, me and Arthur are putting a team together. And right away, Eames is like, oh, Arthur, still working with that stick in the mud, huh? So, like, right away, before they're even on screen together, it's like, obviously, there's already some kind of history between these two characters, like some kind of tension or friction that it's never really explained in the movie,
Right, like a lot of
like
things.
what exactly their past was there. So I think obviously there's a lot of like material for people to explore, and people did go off and write these fan fiction about what their lives were like before we meet them in the movie and how they got to the point where we meet them in the movie. There was a really big one, which if you were in the fandom at the time, Presque Vu, you know about it, written by Rage Prufak, which is basically looking at their past in the military when like the dream sharing technology was being developed, and it became like this huge epic kind of like con that Eames was running on Arthur basically, but then they like end up falling in love, and
Right.
it's so super dramatic and all this stuff. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's just like that kind of relationship that like fandom is naturally going to gravitate towards, because as you said, there's so much to explore like about the relationship
Yeah.
rather than which fandom wants to do in fic and things like that, rather than focusing on the actual plot of the movie, because like who cares.
Right, right, yeah, like, literally, like, who cares? And who cares about Leo DiCaprio, you know? Um,
Yeah, I mean, like, he's canceled now anyway since he's like dating 18-year-olds, but
yeah.
we don't need to
Also,
get into all that.
I mean, from what I remember from the movie, his character was, like, pretty boring. It's like, "Oh, you got a dead wife," whatever. Like, I feel like even, like, Ellen Page's character was so much more interesting than he was.
Oh yeah,
Cillian
yeah,
Murphy's
and
character was more interesting than he was.
oh, Ken Watanabe's character was more
Oh,
interesting.
absolutely. Um, and so something that I think is interesting about Inception is that it's such a visual movie. How do you think that
Hmm.
visuality lended itself to being really popular on Tumblr?
The visuality? Oh man, I don't know. You're asking me like these hard questions.
Well, just because, like, I
I came
remember.
on here ready to talk about like the memes and stuff.
Well, okay. Well, maybe I'll just say what I thought, which is that it's
Yeah.
it's
No, please go ahead.
it's such a visually interesting movie, and Tumblr as a platform at that time was so focused on sort of like people being very, very creative with their graphics and with their gifs, and like keeping the gifs under the limit, and like
Hmm.
making the graphics as high quality as possible. And so there's so much creativity, I think, to be had in the raw material of that movie in particular, just because of the art direction and the special effects and stuff like that.
I mean, I'm sure there were people in the fandom like producing that kind of visual work. I don't think it was like the parts of the fandom that I was involved
Oh,
in.
interesting.
Most of that was like happening in fic. Like the creative stuff was like in fic, and then we got on Tumblr like to share silly memes and like make jokes about it.
So I mean, what were some of your favorite Inception memes of the time?
So I think the one that is like still a classic today, the first one I thought of was the scene with Cobb, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and then Cillian Murphy's character, whose name is escaping me at the moment.
Yeah, I
I
don't
should have
know.
rewatched the movie before we did this, but
Give
that's
you an
okay. But
excuse.
when they're in the dream and they first meet in the dream at the bar,
Uh-huh.
and uh, Cobb is like explaining like dream sharing and stuff to him, and there's like this part where he leans in and squints at him
I
that
remember
like
this
people
one.
just screen capped and were like putting all kinds of different, it was like a three
Yeah,
panel
yeah.
meme. It was
Oh
one of
my
those
god.
things. Yeah, I
I
know you know what I'm
I'm
talking
like
about,
dying
but
right
for
now. I
anyone
just remembered this.
you just remembered this
I hadn't thought about this
this
meme.
like haunt
Oh my god.
This meme haunts me to this day, but like
It's
I,
it's
I
so
will go
iconic.
periods where I'll forget about it for a little while, and then something will
Oh
remind
my
me, and then
god.
I'll just be like, that is the best meme the Inception fandom
I
ever did.
I'm sorry, I'm remembering the one where he blows in his face.
Yes, yes, blow in my eyes, and then like
And this is, like, gonna be so incomprehensible for anybody who hasn't seen this meme, but it's
oh, I
so
know.
funny.
Then
Oh
there's the other
god.
one where he's like, Killian Murphy's like, there's a dog behind you, and it's like one of those, like, like the kind of dog Jenna Marbles has, where it's like that little
The chihuahua.
like greyhound type with
Yeah.
like real like almost bald,
Uh-huh.
and they make like those little alien faces.
Uh-huh.
So there's like one of those, and Cobb's like, oh, what does the dog or he's like, what does the dog look like? And then he just like does the squinty face at it. It's like it's so funny.
Oh my god.
Oh man.
I
So
think
that was a good one.
that's a good one. That's also a meme that wouldn't really propagate today because it was such of that macro impact font culture that
Yeah,
existed on Tumblr
yeah,
at the time that was like, it's a completely different way about thinking about what a meme is. It's like a reproducible image format. That's what it was then. Or an
yeah, right.
exploitable as they are called. That one was
Yeah, some kind of template where you can
right.
just fill it in, and you do still see that on Tumblr today to an extent, like with the expanding brain meme and all that,
Yeah.
where people can just kind of fill in whatever text they want. But I do think it was something that was a lot more prevalent
Yeah.
back in the early
I would say it's
days
more like a
for sure.
comic strip than the type of memes you see today, where if you have text on an image,
Yeah,
it's probably like labeling the parts of the image to be like me, this thing, this
yeah,
like that's a
right.
more common exploitable than like yeah, that's interesting. Oh man, that was a funny one. What about you mentioned Tom Hardy of MySpace. What was that relationship? What was his relationship to MySpace? I love this story.
So people discovered Tom Hardy's old MySpace, which I guess was like still active, even though I don't think he was like still actively using it
Uh-huh.
by the time the movie came out. I think this was like him back in mid 2000s or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But it was just like all these thirst trap photos, like before the term thirst trap was even used, but like those say
Yeah.
selfie overhead angle, like shirtless, looking down at his abs.
Mhm.
Sometimes he has like sunglasses on, it's inside, it's nighttime, like whatever. There was this one where he took a picture in his apartment, and there was like a palm behind him, like a plant, like a potted palm,
Yeah.
and it looked like the leaves were coming out of his head, and in the caption he wrote, "Not my hair, it is a palm, XX." He put XXs in all his captions too. And that one like really took off, especially in like my circle,
Oh yeah.
like and like anything. And I was living in Florida at the time, so then it became my role when I was like out and about to like take pictures of palm trees and then like come back and post them and be like, "Not my hair, it is a palm, XX."
It's so pure.
So
I love that. And then there was something about he like rescued a cat.
yes, the cat, when he was filming this story came back on Tumblr for some reason, like a couple years ago. I don't know what Tom Hardy was doing. Oh, probably Mad Max. It was after Mad
Oh
Max came
yeah,
out,
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess. And there was kind of that Tom Hardy renaissance on
The
Tumblr
Hardy
with
Sans.
like, and people were discovering his MySpace for the first
Oh
time. And those of
wow.
us who, experienced the Inception days were like, oh, you sweet summer children. Like, we've been through all this, but we can bring it back up again. No, it was this story about a cat. He was filming something in Romania. This cat followed him back to his hotel, and he wrote up this huge like multiple page, and like the way he writes, it's like no line breaks, like no punctuation or paragraph breaks. It's like this block of text
Mhm.
about this story about him finding this cat. And there were just like all these little quotable bits about like in there when he's like, he follows me around talking in Romanian. I'm like, mate, I speak English, I don't know what the fuck you're on about. And and like he took and basically like ended up finding a home for this stray cat that he rescued. And so he's a very, very sweet guy.
That's amazing. I was gonna ask. So something that I like about this era of Tumblr is that Inception included, it was kind of like before franchises took over the site. movie franchises in particular.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
2010 was this year. 2010 and 2011 were sort of these years where like the film fixations were like these sort of like standalone movies. Like I kind of lump
Hmm.
Inception and The Social Network together in that way.
I was hoping you were going to bring up The Social
Yeah.
Network because I did want to talk about that too. But continue,
No,
please,
I
please.
mean that's just sort of like, this was before I guess the MCU existed at that point, but like I don't think it really blew up on Tumblr until The Winter Soldier, and it was before the new Star Wars
Yeah.
movies, and it was
The time we're talking about is like before the Marvel crossovers were even real. They hadn't released the first Avengers yet,
that's
right?
what I'm
It was
saying.
still it was still just the standalone Marvel movies.
Wait,
Yeah.
wait, 2010, what had come out at that point? Like Iron Man and like Thor, the first
Iron
Thor?
Man and
Yeah,
Thor.
Jesus.
I think the first Captain America didn't come out till
Yeah, that's
2011.
right.
So, yeah, around that time. So yeah, like MCU really wasn't
No,
even like a thing
totally.
at all.
So the
I mean, there were Marvel fans who knew the comics, but
exactly. So yeah, the movies that people, took these ships from and engaged in these fan practices on Tumblr were like these sort of standalone movies, which I think is really interesting because it's I guess maybe it still happens today, but there's such a dominance and a preponderance of like franchise
mhm.
obsession.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure some of that has to do with like the fact that there's just more
Yeah.
material, for people to gravitate towards, like versus a standalone movie where like it kind of comes out and it's like, okay, now it's done, and of course, that like the actors aren't, still going out and doing press for it really, like once the movie is already out, so it kind of falls onto the fandom to keep it going,
Right.
and sometimes it'll go for a few months, and like sometimes it'll burn out after a few weeks,
And other
but
times it's eternal.
Inception really was one of those.
Yeah.
Other times, yeah, but yeah, Inception really was one of those ones that kind of kept going for months and months and months, after it came out, and even after anyone kind of in pop culture, as in a bigger sense, was like even still talking about it, like people had moved on.
Yeah, but I think it's the elements of the movie that make itself available to that kind of obsession that do that continue its sort of spirit, yeah, past when pop culture has
Hmm.
sort of been like, all right, it's done, it's over, there's not going to be a sequel.
Yeah.
And fandom kind of, yeah, fills that gap. So how many people do you think were in, your side of that community? Was it small? Was it medium sized?
Oh, let me. I mean, like maybe a dozen or so,
Mhm.
couple dozen people, maybe. I don't. There's only a couple of them that I still, remain in contact with to this day. We kind of all, branched off into like different interests.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's at its high point. I would say like probably a couple dozen.
Yeah. And what were the I know you mentioned that one fic, but what were the sort of main fan works that were created sort of around this time that you remember everybody sort of like being a fan of on their own?
There were a lot of AUs.
Uh-huh.
There was this one coffee shop AU, because I think this was also at the point when like coffee shop AUs as a concept hadn't really like been overdone yet,
Mhm.
or like hadn't, I guess the market wasn't as saturated with
Right,
them,
right.
so to speak. Um, but like yeah, like coffee shop AUs weren't. There was I can't remember. Oh no, it was called the Only Living Boy in New York.
Uh-huh.
I remember the Simon and Garfunkel quote, and it was Arthur Eames, because that was the big ship, and it was Arthur is like this obsessive, like hardworking lawyer who has devoted his entire life to his career and like has no life outside of his work, and then Eames runs the coffee shop that just opened across from his office, and like he ends up going in for coffee and like keeps coming back,
Oh,
and
classic.
I mean like it's
Classic.
the coffee
Well,
shop
yeah.
AU. Like I don't need to tell you the plot, you already know the plot.
Uh-huh.
Like it's that trope, right?
Absolutely.
But it was like very well done, and it was very sweet, and there was this eventually Eames finds out that like Arthur's a really good baker and he can make like really good pastries
Mhm.
and stuff, and Eames is like totally shocked by this revelation, and there's this line he has that a friend of mine and I still quote to this day about this brownie that he eats, and he's like, Arthur, I would marry this brownie. I would take this brownie on lavish exotic vacations. And it's like, of all the things to stick with me, like, for 10 years, like, why do I still remember this line from this coffee shop AU about Inception that, like, to the point where I can still quote it. You know,
Yeah.
it's just like one of those things.
Yeah.
So
Um,
that's one I really remember. And there were a lot of AUs, yeah, because I think, as you said, like, the movie is, like, very cerebral and, like, heavy, and I don't think fandom was, like, really interested in exploring that part of it as much. I mean, like, it's nice, but in order to, like, sit down and write about that, you kind of have to, like, devote yourself to it and, you know, actually, like, put the work in and, like, do some research about,
yeah.
like, you know, other things, like, you know, how the military was at the time, or, like, whatever stuff like that. We're like, we don't care. Like, give us the sweet, like, coffee shop
Yeah.
romance. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, that's what we're here for.
I know that Inception was sort of this controversial movie because people were like, "I don't get it. What does the ending mean?" You know, blah blah blah. What did you think? You know, the ending meant? Did you even care?
So I think I do think it was a new thing, for people to kind of encounter a movie where it's like it doesn't, you know, neatly resolve itself at
Uh
the
huh.
end, and it kind of wants people to have, like, different takes on it. I think that was also something that kept people talking about it for as long as they did, because it wasn't, you know, something that was very clear cut, and there was a lot of room for, like, people to say, like, well, this is my theory about what really happened, and, like, this is, you know, my theory and
Hmm.
whatever. Um, I do think it doesn't matter to a certain extent. I think, like, the decision, obviously, the last shot of the movie, you've got the iconic last shot of the
Yeah.
top that's spinning. And again, for anyone who might not know what Inception is, the top, the point of this top that he has is he spins it, and if he's in a dream, it'll keep spinning and spinning, and it'll never fall over because, you
Yeah.
know, reality doesn't have the same rules. Um, and so the very last shot, he thinks he's gotten, you know, back home to his family, who he hasn't seen, his children, in years, and he's really scared that this might be a dream and not actually happening. So he spins the top, but then he sees his children, and he just, like, walks away and, like, doesn't even pay attention, and the top keeps on spinning. You kind of see it wobble a little bit, like maybe it's gonna fall over, and then it's like, boom, roll credits. So we never actually find out, like, was the top going to fall, was it just going to keep
Uh huh.
spinning, is he actually home, is he just dreaming, like, we don't know. But I do think, like, the decision to, you know, deliberately cut it off like that,
Hmm.
was, you know, kind of Christopher Nolan's way of saying, yeah, it really doesn't matter, you know, if it's real or not. The point is that he, you know, he's with his children
Right.
again. So even if it is a dream, even if it's not real, like, who are you to tell him that, you know, his happiness is, because his happiness was
Right.
real.
Right.
His, you know, his joy at seeing his children again was real. So, you know, that's just, like, my take
Yeah.
on it, though.
I know. I like that.
And many people had many
Oh,
takes. Yeah.
I'm sure the takes were coming hot and heavy. So yeah, in your position as a member of this sort of, you know, relatively small crew within the larger Inception fandom, were you creating a lot of content, or was it mainly just conversational and informal?
I was not really creating content at the time. I mean, I was definitely participating in the meme circulation and all
Mhm.
that, but I wasn't, like, going out and writing fic or making graphics, anything like
Mhm.
that. This was also, at a point in, like, my fandom life when, like, I hadn't really gotten, like, Tumblr was the thing that got me into making GIFs and, like,
Right.
learned how to use Photoshop and things
Uh-huh.
like that. But it didn't come quite at that point. Like, Inception wasn't, what motivated me to, like, finally pirate Photoshop and start, like, making gifts. Because the other thing is, there was so much content out there already that, like, I don't think I felt the need to, like, create any of my own. When I was like, oh, like, so many other people are making things, I can, you know, just sit back and, like, reblog stuff and have a fun time, like, talking about funny memes without having to put, like, as much effort into creating things myself.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's just me.
So there were other people sort of in that in your area that played the role of providing the stuff to reblog.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you wanted to talk about the social network. Was that sort of occurring simultaneously with Inception for
It
you?
was, it was. So Social Network, I think, I can't remember when it came out because I don't think I saw it in
I think it was
theaters.
in It was, like,
It
in
was
September of that year.
it
I'm
was
doing a whole
yeah.
episode next week on it, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, this is a good warm up then.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it came out a couple months after, I think, like sometime in
Yeah.
the, well, but because the thing was, when the 2011 Oscars
I was
rolled
just
around.
gonna say, there was, like,
Yes.
a
Oh my
war.
goodness.
The
There was
Oscars that year.
all this uh yeah, war, I guess, essentially. Even though like I didn't really partake in that because I was a fan of like both movies, like I loved The Social
Mhm.
Network.
Yeah.
But like people felt very very strongly, they were both up for Best Picture, which is like
Yeah.
surprisingly enough, like I look back now and I'm like, Inception got nominated for Best Picture, even though like at the time I was like, this is the best movie ever made. um
Right.
but and neither of them got it. It ended up going to the King's Speech.
Which is so funny because both The Social Network and Inception have lingered in the public consciousness far longer and
Oh
more
yes,
impactfully
oh
than The
yes.
King's Speech has ever done, and I think people knew at that time that maybe that's why they gave it to I don't know, it was ridiculous. I remember being so outraged. So
Yeah,
outraged.
but it was so funny because like before the awards happened, it was just this constant like arguing back and forth about which movie deserved it more, and then afterwards when like King's Speech wins, it's like now everyone can kind of turn around and then direct their anger at King's Speech instead of being fighting each other. We can all come
Right.
together against our common enemy, the King's
Right,
Speech.
right. Yeah.
But yeah, it was, and that was also kind of my first experience of like award show season on Tumblr,
Oh, yeah.
which I never really participated in award show culture prior to that, other than the one time Return of the King got 12 Oscars or whatever it was in 2003.
Yeah.
Um,
What was I mean, the atmosphere was crazy during that award season, I think because of the Social Network and Inception, and they both had, like, these very charismatic casts. What did
yes,
the
yes,
Inception
and
cast get up to, those antics?
what was the Inception cast getting up to? Oh man. Honestly, I was probably more focused on Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield were doing.
Yeah.
They were, I like, if you had to talk in terms of like which cast was like
Right.
more appealing and like which cast members had like that chemistry that fandom gravitates towards, I think like Social Network cast kind of wins that one hands
Oh,
down.
absolutely.
Um
But it's interesting because then you have to look at the content of the movies, and Social Network as a movie, people have managed to find spaces in the canon for it, even though, like, logically it shouldn't allow for it. But Inception has a much more open canon, I think, that created more space for exploration for relationship stuff. And Social
Yeah,
Network, of course,
and
is
the
based on
other
real
thing
life.
with Inception that you don't really see as much in other fandoms at the time or today was like all the multi shipping that was going on, and different
Oh,
people.
really?
Yeah, yeah, because like all there were so many different combinations of characters that you could, like, Arthur Eames was the big one. But like
Uh-huh.
I said, the first time I watched the movie, like Arthur Eames didn't even occur to me. I was focused on Arthur and Cobb. And
Uh-huh.
then there's like Cobb and Ariadne, Ellen Page's character, which is like funny because now we know Ellen Page is a lesbian.
Uh-huh.
But like at the time she hadn't come out yet, and so like, and I mean she's playing a character anyway. Like
Right.
her
Yeah.
personal sexuality, like, doesn't necessarily affect that, but I think it does affect like how people view her like would view her
Mhm.
character or think about it or whatever.
Mhm.
um but yeah, and then people were shipping Cobb and Saito was a big one, Leo and Ken Watanabe's characters.
Uh-huh.
That was a big one because it's like he went all the way to Limbo to save him when Saito was stuck there.
Right.
He could, it's like Cobb could have left, but he made the choice to stay behind and like go
Uh-huh.
find him when they were old men and
Oh,
say,
yeah.
come back with me, we'll be young men together again. Like, excuse me, what? So that was a big one.
Oh, I
Um,
didn't I didn't even know
and
that.
yeah, oh well, you're learning something new
I am
now.
learning. Did people
But yeah,
ship,
so
Killian Murphy with, Cobb?
probably. I think Cobb got kind of shipped with everyone. I think Cobb and Arthur were kind of like the bicycles of that fandom to
Right.
an extent.
Wow, I
And
haven't heard
Eames
that
too a
term
little bit.
used in a while.
Fandom bicycle?
Fan and bicycle.
Yeah, dusted off my little encyclopedia of old school fandom terms
Of
there.
lingo, yeah. Um, it's so interesting, yeah, because Tom Hardy went on to do Mad Max, which sort of gave him a renaissance on Tumblr. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, like, never did, like, a Tumblr movie again, did he? 'Cause
I
people
don't think so,
loved him. People
but
loved
he
him
was
during
on
those Inception.
Tumblr. He
Oh,
had a
yeah.
Tumblr account. Yeah, Hit
That's
Record
right.
Joe. And he would like post little videos and stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think I did follow him. I don't I can't like for the life of me recall like what his actual content was now. I think he just kind of got on every once in a while.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that would those were the days when Tumblr was a social network like any other that people would just make
mhm,
accounts on to post, like a Twitter or an Instagram, instead of being, as it was early on and as it resumed being after its decline, which is simply a fandom space and a space for community.
mhm.
Like, celebrities would make Tumblrs and like kind of like post on them,
Oh
because
yeah,
they would
yeah.
because that was just a place to post.
Yeah,
But
I know you just did a Glee episode.
right.
Diana Agron had a Tumblr. I followed
Oh,
her too.
really?
I had a huge crush on her. Yeah.
Oh, I
Um,
didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. I
There
did
were
not get a chance to listen to the Glee episode. I meant to do that
Oh,
before, but I didn't have time to.
it's
I'm sure
really
it's good.
good. It's really good. I'm gonna probably the thing about this podcast is I'm probably gonna do multiple episodes for the same fandom just so I can get, different perspective, but that's a
Oh
really good
sure.
one. Um, so, going back to Inception, when did it start to disperse? When did it start to fade out? How long did it take for people to start to filter away to other fandoms?
I think the Oscars helped to keep it going like into 2011 because there was, all the anticipation of like, the awards and who's going to win and like that
Uh-huh.
stuff. So I think probably after the Oscars is when people kind of started to move on to other things because there wasn't anything to look forward to
Uh-huh.
still. And like obviously like people were still making content and sharing fic and memes and all that kind of stuff, but that was I think yeah that after the Oscars was probably the point when it
Yeah.
started to break up a little more.
Did a lot of people go to the same place after that? Like find new things to get obsessed with together, or was there like a separation?
There was a bit of a separation in my circle. A lot of the people I met through Inception were Supernatural fans at the time. I think like Supernatural had come back on like in the spring. After
Mhm.
so Oscars were in like January or February or whatever, and then like there was a season that was airing. Um, and I had not previously been into that at all. I knew of Supernatural, but the
Uh-huh.
that I knew about it were not good. And so it was like one of those things where like that because that fandom had a reputation for being like especially crazy, like even
Oh,
by
yeah.
fandom standards at the
Oh,
time.
yeah.
And so I had always like kind of stayed away from it and never like really knew anyone who was into it. But now these people that I met through Inception, who I'm like really good friends with, I find out are like Supernatural fans. I'm like, wait a minute, I thought like all Supernatural fans were like batshit and like into like weird things and had like no sense of boundaries or like respect for but you guys seem like normal. um so it
A
was
learning
I
moment for you.
Right, yeah, I was expanding my horizons at this
Uh-huh.
time. So yeah, so they then kind of talked me into like getting into Supernatural. So that was like what I jumped to just by virtue of like who I was associated with in the Inception fandom and like what
Yeah.
their prior interests were.
Yeah.
But
Um,
I don't think there was like uh I don't know. I don't think there was like one fandom that kind of everyone carried over to naturally, which does happen sometimes. Like when a
right.
show ends and like people, will say like, "Oh, fans of this show that just ended or whatever, like if you like that, like you should check out this." And then like everyone will hop onto this new thing because it had like a couple things in common or whatever,
Right, right.
as kind of like a starting point to get them into.
Mhm. Do you think that, something that I've talked about on the show is that in the early days of Tumblr, everyone was pretty young and had just come from other sites and made this
Hmm.
migration. Do you think that in the Inception fandom was one of people's sort of first fandoms, or at
Oh
least first
no.
fandoms that they participated in that
Mm-mm.
sense? Oh,
Mm-mm,
really?
no. Yeah, so it's the age thing is funny. I was almost 19 years old, like, when
Uh-huh.
I was getting into I was 18 when I signed up, almost 19. My birthday was in the fall, so, like,
Mhm.
when I was, like, starting to use Tumblr consistently, and most of the people I was friends with were, like, kind of around that same age, like, so
Oh, that's
definitely, like,
interesting.
later teens.
So it was
Yeah.
a little bit of an older fandom compared to some of the other communities on the site at that time.
Yeah, yeah. It was really interesting for me listening to you and Sam talk about the Doctor Who fandom and, like, how, everyone was like 12 and 13. I'm like, that wasn't
Yeah.
my experience at all.
I mean, maybe
Um
because Inception was just, like, a more, like, adult movie? I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know either. But no, a lot of us had, previous, like, fandom experiences,
Uh-huh.
and, like, coming from LiveJournal, for me, I remember the last big fandom I was in was the Star Trek, when the first reboot movie came out in
Yeah, yeah.
2009. That was, like, a huge, I was in, like, these different Star Trek communities on LiveJournal, and, we, like, hosted this, like, meetup in DC where we all went and met up at the movie theater to, like,
Uh-huh.
watch the movie and then, like, go out for dinner afterwards and stuff like that. And that was, like, my first big kind of, like, real life fandom meetup, um, outside of, like, conventions and things like that. So yeah, so it was definitely not my first time to the fandom rodeo, so to speak, and I think the same was true for a lot of the people, that I was friends with in those days.
Were you still on LiveJournal at that point at all? Like, was there Inception stuff happening over there that you were aware of?
Not that I was aware of. I think, like, LiveJournal, kind of around that time was more like being used for sharing fic and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and Delicious, that was another site, like a
Right.
bookmarking site, for
Uh-huh.
fics and stuff. So there was still some of that, but I wasn't really, like, joining any, like, live journal communities, like, based around Inception or anything like that. They might have been out there. I wasn't really looking for them on live journal at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah, Tumblr. I had kind of made the switch by then.
Yeah. It lasted maybe less than a year, but it seemed like at its height the activity was pretty intense
Yeah.
with Inception. It inspired
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah,
emotion.
about half a year probably. Like, it came out in July. Oscars were the next year in February.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's like 6 7 months. I
Yeah,
can't do math.
I think
I'm
for
an
for
art major.
for a standalone movie that, probably had no intention of becoming a fandom, center, I think that's pretty
hmm
impressive.
Well, I don't think anyone goes out to make a movie, like, thinking about, like, will the fans on Tumblr be into this? I don't. Maybe
Well,
they do
maybe now
now.
they
I don't
do.
know.
Maybe
Maybe
now they
now
do.
they do.
I don't
Certainly not back then.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point because I think now, I mean, maybe moving forward as people sort of grow up and out of, we're already seeing like Tumblr pop stars. I think Tumblr major
hmm
film directors are the next is going to be the next step.
Well, and I think, like, celebrities just have more of an awareness of Tumblr and, like, these online communities that exist, and,
Mhm.
like they kind of know what to expect from
Right.
us now. I
Right.
feel like, as I don't really remember when, like, that happened, like, when they started becoming aware, like that Tumblr was, this online place where
Right.
teenagers would kind of get together
Where
and
it became
and
synonymous with a certain type of obsessive fandom. I would imagine that
yes,
it was probably around 2012. I don't know why that,
yes.
because it built up through the years prior to that and sort of peaked 2012, 2013, and has
Yeah, and
diminished since
I
then, but
remember it was such a big deal for us when we realized that, like, they were aware of us and, like, they
yeah.
knew what we were doing, and, like, it really freaked us out.
Uh-huh.
And now
Uh-huh.
I think, like, we're kind of more used to it, but I just remember, like, it being a really like big shocking thing at the time to suddenly realize like, wait, like they read our posts about like shipping and stuff. Like now like people are asking actors and interviewers if they know what shipping is, and we're like, wait, that's like our, you know, dirty little secret. Like you're not supposed to like go, you know, on
Yeah.
TV and ask them questions about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I mean, and it's not something that can really be reversed. I think the relationship between fans and creators and actors has definitely changed over the past 10 years, you know,
Oh
influenced
yeah.
to one degree or another by Tumblr and by those communities and the visibility of those communities.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um
yeah.
so if you could take away anything from your time in the Inception fan, I mean, how did it change you like as a fan?
As a fan, I don't know. I mean, it this is a tough question.
Did it give you, like, certain expectations or certain things that you started to look for in new things to enjoy or new communities to be a part of?
mm, I don't I don't know really. I don't
That's okay.
I
That's
feel like this
okay.
is a really boring answer to that question cuz but I nothing's coming to
Oh,
mind
no, it's
that, you
fine.
know, that changed for me like with Inception.
Yeah.
I mean like the people that I met through it, you know, I've like I said I'm still like really good friends with some of them today. But in terms of like how it affected how I interact with fandom or like consume media or anything like that, I don't think because, like I said, I had already been, you know,
Right, right.
participating in fandom and consuming media like for a long, like pretty much like my starting in my preteen years. I'm now,
Uh-huh.
you know, like 18 years old by the time Inception comes out, so I had been doing this
Oh,
for a
yeah,
while.
you've been around the block. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it was a little. Now that I'm thinking about it, okay, it's to go back to like age and fandom a little bit. I don't know if this is like relevant to your question really, but it's
uh-huh,
something I just thought about because it was kind of my first time uh being in a fandom where I was kind of like the same age as the other people. Like when I was in fandom coming up on LiveJournal, it was a lot of, like my early days was like anime,
uh-huh,
like Yu Yu Hakusho, Inuyasha, Yu-Gi-Oh, like all that stuff.
uh-huh,
And most of those fans were like older women who I was like interacting with
uh-huh,
back in those days, and it didn't strike me as like weird at the time that I'm like 13 years old and talking to these like women in their 20s and 30s,
mhm,
um sometimes, you know, about like adult topics that I probably should not have been like talking with these people about.
right.
um and then like for me to like kind of go from that to now like suddenly I'm like the same age as people, and then like now at this point in my life, you know, being on Tumblr and, you know, like, oh, wait, everyone's younger than me now. So there was like that kind of a shift, I guess, in terms of like,
Yeah,
I don't know, just how I related to the like the people around me in fandom and realizing suddenly like, oh, like wait, I have to be the adult now.
yeah.
Um,
That's I mean, that's a big change. I think that's something that a lot of fandom people experience, you know, moving through these different spaces.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
well, thank you so much, Molly, for talking to me about Inception. It was really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I hopefully I had, you know, some entertaining things to say for people.
The Askbox theme song is Full Screen by Adult Mob. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you should. Next week, as promised, we'll be talking about The Social Network. It's going to be fun.
Still the warmer must be inside you, but nature doesn't get to choose.